Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about Russia's largest company, Gazprom. Now, if you follow the channel, you'll be familiar with Gazprom. It's the state-owned enterprise that handles all of Russia's gas. And prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Russia was the largest supplier of gas, not just to Europe, but to the world. It was one of the biggest companies. And the reason for that is because Russia is sitting on the world's largest reserves of gas. As you can see from this graphic, it's estimated that Russia has over 24% of the total global supply. However, as I'm sure you'll be aware, one of the immediate impacts of Russia's invasion of Ukraine was that the European nations decided that they no longer wanted to buy Russian gas. And one of the most famous incidents occurred in September 2022 when the Nord Stream pipeline, which was going under the Baltic Sea, providing gas directly from Russia to Germany, blew up, and nobody really knows who was behind that explosion. A lot of conspiracy theories. And as you can see from this graph, since the start of the war in Ukraine, the amount of gas that Europe is buying directly from Russia has fallen dramatically. And as a result of that, Gazprom has moved from being Russia's most profitable company to posting enormous losses. And as we've discussed in previous videos, it's been very difficult for Gazprom to pivot in the same way as the oil businesses did in Russia. They were able to divert their lost sales to Europe and the West, to India and China, by simply sending the vessels that oil was moving on longer distances. But with gas, it's very difficult to do that because you can't construct a pipeline overnight. You need to have a locked-in contract with the buyer for the next 5 or 10 years to make that even feasible to build a pipeline to China or India. And so Gazprom needed to convert a lot of its gas to LNG, but it simply didn't have enough LNG facilities to be able to send all of the lost sales of gas into those facilities. So what's happened is that Gazprom has had to leave all of that gas sitting under the ground. It isn't able to monetize it. And this is now causing major problems for the company and also for the Russian economy, because historically Gazprom at its height produced 5% of Russia's GDP. It's more than 50% owned by the Russian state, and it was a cash machine. This was an absolutely fantastic business from Russia's point of view, because gas demand over the past 30 years has been rising significantly because it was a much cleaner form of fossil fuel than coal for producing electricity. So lots of different countries in Europe built out gas-fired power stations to keep electricity running, and they were using Russian gas. But obviously all of this has come to a grinding halt since the war in Ukraine started. Now, before we go on any further today, I want to talk to you about NordVPN, who I've partnered with for today's video, and who are offering Joe Blogs viewers an exclusive 4 months extra on a 2-year plan. Now, if you follow the channel, you'll know that I personally have been a victim of cybercrime. This channel was hacked and taken over by cybercriminals. And if I'd have been using NordVPN at that point, it would never have happened, because NordVPN contains a unique feature called Threat Protection Pro, which would have prevented the cybercriminals being able to hack my account. So NordVPN is fantastic for protecting you every single time you go online, making sure that nobody can hack into your accounts or steal your password or steal any money from you. But it's also amazing for opening up a world of entertainment, because you can access movies and TV shows and sports events that you're geo-blocked from. You can change your location and access all of that entertainment and information. And the fantastic news is that NordVPN is offering Joe Blogs viewers an exclusive 4 months extra on a 2-year plan, which you can access by going to nordvpn.com/Joe Blogs or clicking in the link in the description below. And the great news is that NordVPN offers a 30-day money-back guarantee. This chart shows the daily revenue that Russia has been earning from the sale of its fossil fuels from the end of 2021 through to the end of February 2025. And the section that we really want to focus in on here is pipeline gas, because that's predominantly how Gazprom was earning the majority of its money from European sales. And what you can see here is that before the war in Ukraine started, Russia was earning 260 million euros per day. Now, the US dollar equivalent of that is around $290 million, and that equates on an annualized basis to $105 billion. That's what Russia was earning from its sales of pipeline gas. Now, what you can see from this chart is that immediately following the invasion of Ukraine, the amount of revenue actually increased to around 300 million euros per day. And the reason for that was because the price of gas spiked and also European countries needed time to be able to find alternative sources to be able to fuel all of their power stations. But over the last 2.5 years, Russia has seen a significant fall in the amount of revenue it's earning from pipeline gas, and the most recent figures for the end of February 25 show that it's now earning around 68 million euros per day, and that equates to around $75 million, and on an annualized basis, that brings in around $27 billion, which is a reduction of $78 billion per year. That is absolutely huge, and that's the reason why Gazprom is in such a dire situation at the moment. This table shows the annual revenue and profit posted by Gazprom between 2020 and 2023, and it also includes the last 3 quarters of 2024. We don't have the full year figures for 2024 yet, they haven't been posted by Gazprom. And what this chart shows is that in 2021, which was the last full year that was unaffected by the war in Ukraine, Gazprom earned revenues of more than 10 trillion rubles, which is the equivalent of around $138 billion. And that resulted in a net profit of 2.1 trillion rubles, or $28 billion. And that was the record ever year for Gazprom. This was happy days. Now, as we've just discussed, the immediate impact of the invasion of Ukraine was actually positive for Gazprom because we saw that spike in gas prices and European countries continued to buy Russian gas. And as a result of that, the full year figures for 2022 reflected record revenue of almost 12 trillion rubles, or $126 billion. And that translated into a net profit of 1.2 trillion, or $13 billion. And the reason why there was a fall in profitability was because in the second half of the year, there was a significant fall in the price of gas and also in the volume of gas that Gazprom was selling. And this was because the European countries were either cancelling their agreements or they were having their supply cut off directly by the Kremlin. The figures for 2023 reflect the fact that a lot of European countries were able to successfully switch their supply to LNG, which they were buying from places like the United States and Qatar. So they stopped buying Russian gas entirely. And Gazprom's revenues fell to 8.5 trillion rubles, or $91 billion. However, in that year, Gazprom posted a record loss of 629 billion rubles, or just under $7 billion. So you can see that between 2021 and 2023, there was a negative swing of more than $35 billion. In terms of profitability for Gazprom, it went from posting a record profit of more than $28 billion to a record loss of just under $7 billion. And the latest figures that we have for the first 3 quarters of 2024 show that the problems are continuing for Gazprom. It's recorded revenues of 4.3 trillion rubles, which is the equivalent of $44 billion. And so far, the company has posted a loss of 309 billion rubles, or $3.2 billion. But as you'll know if you follow the channel, Russian businesses quite often post significant losses in their final quarter. That's what we've seen from the Russian state and lots of other companies. So there is a distinct possibility that the financial figures for the full year of 2024 could be even worse than 2023. Certainly, when you look at the revenue figure, it looks a lot lower than it was in 2023 proportionately. The disastrous results at Gazprom are really bad news for the Russian economy because it remains as Russia's largest employer. Now, here's a quick question for you. Do you think you could name any of the top 10 employers in the world? Gazprom isn't one of them, but it is actually number 12. So it's one of the 12 biggest companies in the world in terms of how many people it employs. Well, let's have a look at the chart. This chart shows the top 20 companies in the world by number of employees. And if you guessed that Walmart was the biggest employer, then well done. They employ over 2.1 million people, followed by Amazon at 1.5 million. The Taiwanese business Foxconn comes in at number 3, followed by Accenture, which is officially headquartered in Ireland. Volkswagen, the German car manufacturer, comes in at number 5, followed by Tata Consultancy Services from India, DHL Group from Germany, BYD from China, Compass Group from the UK, United Parcel Services is at number 10, followed by Home Depot, And Gazprom comes in at number 12 with around 500,000 employees. The official figure that's posted on the Gazprom website is 498,000 rather than 468,000 showing on this graphic. And it's now been announced that Gazprom is now in the process of reducing its staff numbers, potentially by up to 40%. And that would be a lot of people who are facing the chop if that is correct. Now here's another question for you. Do you know what the tallest building in Europe is? Well, I'd be surprised if you did, because it's Gazprom's head office. This impressive structure is called the LAKHTA Centre and was opened in 2018 at a cost of $1.8 billion. And it's now been reported that Gazprom is considering selling it. Now, it's located in St. Petersburg, and given everything that's going on in Russia right now with all of the sanctions and the problems that it's having, I'd be surprised if there's lots of buyers lining up to move into this. It's very unlikely that any other company apart from a Russian business would want to buy it. Most multinational businesses have exited from Russia over the past 3 years or so. So I think Gazprom may struggle to find a long list of candidates who want to move into the LAKHTA Centre. Now, as well as being the tallest building in Europe, the LAKHTA Centre is the 18th tallest in the world. So here's another quiz for you. Can you name the top 10 highest buildings in the world? Do you think any of them are located in the USA? This graphic shows the relative size of the top 10 tallest buildings in the world. And you can see that the tallest, the Burj Khalifa, is in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, followed by Merdeka 118 in Kuala Lumpur, the Shanghai Tower in China, the Abraj Al Bait Clock Tower in Saudi Arabia, Ping An International Finance Center in Shenzhen, China comes in at number 5, followed by the Lot World Tower in South Korea. Number 7 is the One World Trade Center in New York, and 8, 9 and 10 are all located in China. So well done if you got any of that top 10. And alongside the sale of Europe's tallest building, Gazprom is now also considering the sale of its export headquarters, which apparently employed over 600 staff at the height of Gazprom's sales, but now employs around 10. So they're rattling around in this huge building. And that's also based in St. Petersburg. So if you're a company and you're looking for 2 massive buildings to set up in a new city, why not go to St. Petersburg? Because you can probably do a deal with Gazprom right now because they're struggling for cash. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's going on with Gazprom gives us a really good insight into what's happening in Russia, because Gazprom is the largest business in Russia. It was its flagship enterprise. This is owned predominantly by the Russian state. And the reason why it was the biggest company in Russia was because Russia is sitting on almost a quarter of the global supply of gas. And over the past 50 years, the demand for gas has increased dramatically. And obviously lots of European countries previously, before the war in Ukraine started, were buying that Russian gas because Russia had built all of these pipelines to make it very easy and convenient and low cost to deliver huge quantities on a daily basis. So European countries had built all of their electricity to be dependent on that gas. And when the war in Ukraine started, it represented a really big dilemma for a lot of those European countries, because Russia at that time had said that Europe would come begging back to it for its gas supplies, that Europe simply couldn't survive without them. But what we've seen over the past 2.5 years is that lots of European companies and countries have moved away from Russian gas. They've converted their facilities to be able to use liquefied natural gas. And of course, you can then import it. Now, there was a cost associated with that. Obviously, there's a cost to building the facilities to convert liquefied natural gas back into normal gas. But also, it was more expensive. It's more expensive to pay for something that's been through a refinery process than it is just to take it out of the ground and send it through a pipe. So European countries swallowed the pain of all of that process. And unfortunately, from Gazprom's point of view, they've been on the receiving end. They have seen a dramatic fall in sales. And as I said at the start of today's video, it's very difficult to be able to go elsewhere. You can't just sell all of that gas directly to India, because in order to do that, either you'd need to build an enormous pipe, which really isn't very practical, or convert it all to liquefied natural gas. And Russia simply hadn't been investing into that network. They didn't have enough facilities to be able to convert the volume they needed to keep their sales up. So Gazprom has gone from being the most profitable business in Russia to one of the biggest loss makers, and it's now suffering extremely badly. And as we've seen in today's video, those losses are continuing. It looks like they might even get worse in 2024, and at some point something has to happen. And so Gazprom is now talking about reducing its staff, selling some of its head offices, but who's going to buy those offices? There aren't really any huge multinational businesses that want to set up operations in St. Petersburg. And what we're seeing here is the true impact of the sanctions against Russia, because that's essentially what we've got. We've got a business that's been sanctioned, we've got a country that's been sanctioned, and previously what was seen as being a very long-term profitable enterprise that basically would have churned off cash for the next 50 years for Russia is now making huge losses and causing problems, because almost 500,000 people in Russia are employed by Gazprom. And if you think about the reality of that, you've got 500,000 people who are now at risk of being made redundant. They might not have their salaries, and so they won't spend in their local economy. And so the knock-on implication of that is really quite huge. The Kremlin has been supporting the business. It's been funding all of these losses and allowing all the staff to remain in their jobs and carrying on as normal, as if everything was fine. But it's far from fine at Gazprom. And if this was an enterprise in the USA that was listed on the stock market, it probably would have had to file for Chapter 11 because it simply wouldn't have been able to pay all of its bills. So the overall summary of today's video is that over the past 3 years, we have seen Gazprom going from being the most profitable business in Russia to now one of the biggest losers. Potentially, it's the biggest loss-making company in Russia right now. Around 500,000 people are employed by the company. They're being funded by the Kremlin, and all of this is putting additional pressure onto Russian resources, and the loss of income has been hugely damaging to the Russian state and to Gazprom itself, and really shows the power of the sanctions over the past 3 years. We don't know what's going on in the Kremlin, we don't have that data, but we can see what's happening to Gazprom, and it shows that this business has been completely devastated by the war in Ukraine. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and thank you so much to everybody that's supporting the channel. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a Patreon or a member, thank you so much for that support. Really does help to keep me going. Thank you. And here's something to put a smile on your face.